Now let's begin by chapter 1, which is about characteristics of living organisms and classification, of course. Now let's begin by characteristics, and as we know that we have Mrs. Gran, and for every letter it stands for a word. The first word is movement, of course. And here movement means the action by an organism or a part of an organism to cause a change in position or a change in their place. The next characteristic, respiration. And here this respiration is defined as the chemical reactions that break down the nutrient molecules in the living cells in order to release energy. Yani the main aim of respiration is to release energy where the cells break down or they oxidize in the presence of oxygen, of course, the nutrients or the nutrient molecules, and the best nutrient molecule that provides energy is glucose. There are other types, another type of respiration, which is the anaerobic respiration, where the organisms, they oxidize glucose, yes, but they do not produce a high amount of energy. And aerobic respiration always produces a large amount of energy, while the anaerobic, it produces very little amount of energy. That's why we cannot rely on anaerobic respiration as human beings, but there are organisms like, for example, the yeast that relies on anaerobic respiration. S means sensitivity. And sensitivity here means the ability to detect any change that happens in the environment, and this change is called a stimulus, plural stimuli, of course. And after detection, there is a response from the body. Like, for example, when you hear a sound, this is a response coming from your ear to the vibrations that are found in the air, which represent the stimulus. Sound, this is just vibrations in the air, and we respond to it by hearing or by knowing what is this sound. G stands for growth. And growth here means that there is an increase in two things, in size and in dry mass of the organism. Growth is, we say that it is a permanent increase in case of plants, but it is limited in case of animals and humans, of course. There is an increase in size and dry mass. But what is this dry mass? It is the mass of the organism, the total mass, minus the mass of water. Yani if with the mass of water, we call it the biomass. Dry mass is without the mass of water. And of course, there is an increase in the number of cells. That's why the size increases. The second R stands for reproduction. And reproduction, of course, it comes from to reproduce something, or here to the process that makes more of the same kind of organism. Well, there are two types of reproduction, sexual and asexual, that we are going to deal with later. But what about excretion? This is, E stands for excretion. Excretion means to get rid of the wastes or the toxins that are found, the toxic materials that are found in a body. But we must take care that we say excretion for getting rid of wastes. But what's meant by wastes? These are the byproducts or the waste materials that result from metabolism of the cell. So what is metabolism? Metabolism is a collection of chemical reactions that happen inside the cell, and the most important metabolic reaction, of course, is respiration. For every metabolic reaction that happens inside the cell, there must be a byproduct, or we call it a waste. If I have a cell like this, and here are wastes collected, so in order to, because of course these cells are harmful, so these cells have to cross the cell membrane so that the body can get rid of it. If the wastes crossed a cell membrane, then this is excretion. The why I am explaining this in particular, because there is another thing called egestion. Egestion means to get rid of the undigested food. Undigested food. Here the food moves from the small intestine. If suppose I drew the small intestine, the last part of the small intestine like this, the undigested food is going to pass to the large intestine. This is the large intestine, rectum, and anus. So the undigested food is going to pass like this through the large intestine, and it gets out of the anus as feces. And of course, there is another word for feces, which is stools. Egestion is not an excretion. Do you know why? From what I just said, why egestion is not excretion?
Because excretion is waste from metabolisms and digestion is from undigested food.
Okay, but there is a very important difference, is that in excretion, the wastes have to cross a cell membrane. But as you can see here, that the undigested food just got out of the small intestine to the large intestine, moving through this tube, and then it gets out. It didn't cross any cell membrane. That's why it's not considered as excretion. And this is a famous question, Yani. Why can't we consider egestion as an excretion? Because just a very simple answer, the undigested food does not cross a cell membrane. It just moves in the large intestine and gets out of the body as feces. But here in excretion, waste materials, they have to cross the membrane of the cell in order to be released out of the body. I just wanted to stress on this part, because there comes a question here I saw in many past papers. Now, the last one is nutrition. And here, nutrition means to take in food or nutrients. Of course, food is an organic, the different types of food that we eat, these are organic materials or organic nutrients. But like what? Organic nutrients, like carbohydrates, like lipids or fats, like proteins. All these, they are organic materials because they contain carbon and hydrogen. Whenever we find any compound or any molecule that contains carbon and hydrogen together, then this is an organic material. All the food that we eat contain this carbon and hydrogen. That's why they are organic nutrients. The word nutrient, of course, means the kind of food that we eat in order to gain benefit from. The word nutrition means taking in nutrients, of course, by our mouths, and these organic materials together with the minerals or the salts that we eat as well, they, of course, contain raw materials or energy for growth and for example, repairing of tissue, for being assimilated. So what's the meaning of this word? Yani after we eat or we ingest Ingest means to put in food in our digestive tract. So after we ingest, this food will be digested, and then it's going to be absorbed. Of course, absorption means that it will pass to the blood, and the blood will carry the digested food to the cells, and this food will be assimilated. The word assimilated means that the cells use the absorbed food or the nutrition that reach the cell in order to gain benefit from it. Or we sometimes say that the nutrients, they become as a part of the cell, because of course the cell is going to take these nutrients, and I said to benefit from them. Why? And what's the meaning of to benefit? In order to form materials in the cell out of the digested food, out of the food that we eat. Like what, for example, they form enzymes, they form, for example, antibodies, whatever about. And there are materials that are found inside the cell that are formed from the food that we eat. And this is what's meant by the word assimilation. These are the 7 characteristics of living organisms. And of course, this is the beginning of our syllabus. Now let's go to the next part of the first chapter, which is about classification. Of course, if you have any question, just tell me about it. And if you need me to re-explain a certain part, just tell me. Now here, organisms can be classified into groups according to the features that they share. Now, what's the meaning of the word feature? Feature means the outer appearance and the inner structure. Outer appearance means their outer look. Yani, if you looked at a dog, you can say that its outer appearance differs from the outer appearance of a cat. What about the inner structures? The inner structures means the parts of the body from inside. Like for example, in the fish, they have, their heart has only 1 atrium and 1 ventricle. But for humans, for example, we have 2 atria and 2 ventricles in the heart. There is a difference between the inner organs or the inner structure of the bodies. Classification is based on dividing the living organisms into groups according to their features. But why do we need to classify living organisms? The first thing is to study them, to know any information about the organisms. Also, the classification, it reflects evolutionary relationships, the evolution of living organisms. Yani sometimes they say that there are 2 different organisms, but they have the same common ancestor. So what's the meaning of ancestor? Ancestor means like the grandparent. It means
History.
that, excuse me?
It is history, what happened before and before and before.
Yes, of course. And coming out of this common ancestor, many organisms can be formed later on by evolution, of course. But whenever we can find the evolutionary relationship, we can know if these organisms, for example, they have the common ancestor or not. There is another kind of ancestor which is called the recent ancestor. Recent ancestor is not that old as the common ancestor. Maybe it's here, for example. So this is more recent than the old ancestor or the ones that are not found anymore on Earth. But here, if there are certain features or certain descriptions, adaptive descriptions of a population over time, this will, of course, be a result of natural selection. It means that of course, natural selection will be dealt with in a later chapter خالص. If I have here some organisms and only two of them, for example, continued living, this is because the third one was ignored by nature, because the third one was not adapted to live in some changes of the environment. But the other two were adapted. That's why they were selected to survive. There is a very important concept here, or a very important definition in classification, which is the species. What's meant by species? Species means the organisms that are similar in structure or in features. They can reproduce in order to produce fertile, similar offspring. Now, the word offspring, of course, we use it for all living organisms because we cannot say babies. Babies are only for humans. We cannot say the young because you cannot say the young for a plant, for example. So they have chosen this word in order to be a common word used with all living organisms, representing the new organisms that are produced by reproduction. We define, we know that two organisms or more than two are of the same species if they have similar features, and if there is breeding or reproduction between the members of this group, they can produce fertile, similar offspring, similar in their features. And fertile means that they can reproduce as well. Is this a good definition for all organisms? For every rule, there is an exception. Let me give you an example for exceptions about this definition in particular. For example, lions and tigers, they are different species, but because they are found in the same area, for example, in the woods, so the female lion or the lioness can be mated by a male tiger, although they are two different species, and they produce an organism called the tigon. This tigon is a collection between the lion and the tiger. It has the head of a lion and the body is striped like that of the tiger. This tigon is infertile. And it does not look like its parents. It collects characteristics from both. This means that species definition is wrong here. Also, I can give you an example by a female horse. If it was mated by a male donkey, these are two different species, but because they live in the same place or in the same area, there might be mating between them to produce the mule. The mule is not a donkey and it's not a horse. It's gathering characteristics of both, and again, it is infertile. When I said here that species, the organisms have to be similar and they reproduce to produce fertile, similar offspring, this is the general rule about species, but there are some exceptions, as I just said. Now, classification is based on studies about, let me erase this, the basis of classification is about studies about the morphology and anatomy of the organism. These are the correct words for the outer appearance and the inner structure. Morphology is the outer appearance. And anatomy, of course, is the inner structure, means what's the body made of. The anatomy is the science of the internal structure of an animal, and of course, a plant. the morphology is the overall form and the shape of the bodies. For example, if they have legs, if they have wings, whatever. Anatomy is the detailed internal structure, and this is only known by dissection. If they started to open through a body of any organism, they can know what's the anatomy of this organism. Now, at the beginning, when they started to classify organisms, of course, they were not having any tools. They do not have any information about this. And this started by a scientist. His name was Aristotle. Aristotle, he started the science of classification, but it was not based on any scientific basis. He just looked at organisms and he found out that there are plants and there are animals. Just like that, very simple classification. Plants, he classified them according to their height into herbs, into shrubs, and shrubs means bushes, into trees, according, of course, to their height. And he classified the animals, a very simple classification, and it's not correct at all, into blooded animals and bloodless animals. طب why? يعني for plants, he noticed their size, their height. What about the animals? He considered the animals that have red blood, that they are blooded, and the animals that have white blood, that they are non-blooded or bloodless. But are there animals that have white blood? Yes, the insects, they have white blood. That's why he considered that this is not blood. And this was a very simple classification, but in spite of this, he began the science of classification. Later on, another scientist, later on with hundreds of years, another scientist called Linnaeus. And this scientist, he was a botanist or a scientist dealing with plants, and he started a scientific classification, and he introduced what's the most important in his theory or his studies, and it is still used up till now, which is the binomial system. Binomial system, bi, of course, means two, when nom means name. So he gave every organism two names. So if I want to say what is this binomial system, it's a system naming species in which the scientific name of an organism is made of two parts. One part represents the genus, and another part, the other part represents the species. Now, what is the genus and what is the species? Linnaeus, he classified the organisms into groups. Let me put this picture in order to show you what do I mean. Just a second to upload this picture. Internet connection is somewhat weaker. Yes, here it is. Now, if you looked at this picture, you can see that these are animals. So he arranged all the animals with all their kinds. Of course, they have taken an example of different types of animals. So he put all the animals together in a kingdom. And this is the largest group of classification because there are other kingdoms, the plants, bacteria, fungi, and so on. So let me give you an example by the animal kingdom. Now, if you looked at these animals, you are going to see that there are mammals, this is a reptile, and this is an invertebrate. So he excluded the invertebrate in order to arrange the vertebrates together in a smaller group, which he called the phylum. Of course, phylum Chordata means that they have a vertebral column, and it's not important to know the names. Phylum. So the phylum is a group or a part of a kingdom, but it includes organisms or animals that have more similarities than if I included the invertebrates together. Then he looked at all these and he found that all of them are mammals, but this one is a reptile. So another exclusion excluded this reptile, and he put the rest in a smaller group called the class. It means that this class is a part of the phylum, and the phylum is a part of a kingdom. He called this class because all of them are giving birth to offspring and lactating or feeding their infant or their offspring by breast milk. So he called them mammalia or mammals. Again, these mammals, they are different because I have here, all these are carnivores. They eat flesh or they eat meat, while this one is a herbivore. So he excluded the herbivore and he put all the carnivores in one group he called the order. Again, this is a part of the class, and he called it order Carnivora. Now, we want to know how to classify the bear. So he excluded this wolf or fox or whatever it is, and he put the animals that have the same morphology. As you can see that their outer appearance differ from the fox, he put them together in a family. And then I want to classify the brown bear. This panda has to be excluded. So he excluded the panda, and we are left here with two types of bears, which we call the genus. And each one of them is a species to this genus. So this brown bear is a species of the genus, and this black bear is another species of the genus. Is the panda of the same species? No, it was excluded. But this is what Carl Linnaeus did, is that he classified, or he put the organisms in groups, and each organisms are at the beginning put in a very large group, and then he limited the similarities between the organisms in this very large group. What we are going to know only, what is important for us now, are the genus and species. That's why Carl Linnaeus, he introduced his binomial system of nomenclature or of naming organisms according to the genus and species only. Genus and species. It's not only that he gave two names, but he put certain rules or a certain rule to follow for giving these names. The genus has to begin with a capital letter, while the species has to begin with a small letter. Both of them, they have to be in Latin language, because it's not used anymore and nobody is going to modify it. And we have to write them in both names in italics. So if you, of course, found any strange name when you are reading an article, biological article, this is definitely the scientific name of this organism. In italics means to write it like this. Sometimes we write it in normal. For example, if I want to classify the cat, Felis domesticus. Sometimes we do not write it in italics. We write it in normal letters like this, Felis domesticus, do. But we have to underline it. Also, we can write initial of the genus, and the species has to be written completely. Sometimes they get a question in the test with several names of different species, and they ask you which species have the same genus. You just look at the first name, never the second. When they get you different species of the same genus, like as I showed you now, the brown bear, the black bear, and the panda. The black bear and the brown bear, they both belong to the same genus. So we take the first name and we say that this is the name that denotes, or that allowed us to know that they are of the same genus. Never look at the second name. Okay. This means that the kingdom, or Linnaeus, he introduced the kingdom, then phylum, then class, order, family, genus, and species. Let's go now to, if this is enough. No, it's not enough. Later on, yes, Linnaeus, he introduced a certain scientific base for classification, but later on, this was not enough. That's why scientists modified the classification basics according to the DNA that is found in the cells and proteins produced inside a cell. Yes, we know what is DNA. This is a chemical that is found in the nucleus of the cell, and it carries all our information about our characteristics. But why proteins? Why not fats? Why not carbohydrates? Because proteins, we call them the vital molecules. In every species, there is a certain type of protein that is specific for this species. All of us, we share some proteins, like the proteins forming, for example, our cell membrane, our enzymes, our antibodies, whatever. But for every species, there is a particular protein that is specific for it. That's why they have chosen the proteins in order to analyze them. So when they analyzed the DNA molecule and the proteins found in organisms, they can identify whether these organisms belong to a same ancestor or not. The DNA is just a chemical form from which the chromosomes are made, of course, and each DNA molecule is formed of smaller molecules containing 4 bases. I know you have learned this, and these bases are adenine, guanine, cytosine, and thymine. So biologists compared, because these bases, they are arranged in a certain sequence on the DNA molecule. So the biologists, they compare the sequences of these bases on the DNA of organisms in order to know whether they are of the same species or not. Let me give you an example. Suppose there is a species, and this is a DNA molecule, and the base sequence is like this for a certain protein, for example, C, G, A, and so on. Another species is producing a similar protein, but the base sequence is different. For example, like this. So they are going to know that this is one species and this is another one. Sometimes they find that the sequence is not, difference is not great. For example, I'm comparing with this one, by the way, A, T, C, G. I changed the sequence here. Because these are the same, so they say that they belong to the same ancestor. They are comparing between the sequence of bases of the DNA of organisms in order to know whether they are of the same species or not. The more the similarity between the base sequence, the more closer the organisms to each other. It means that they are more related to one another, or they share a common ancestor. Organisms which share a common ancestor have a base sequence of DNA that are more similar than those that share a distant ancestor or a very, very old ancestor. The sequence of bases in DNA and of the protein or amino acids that form these proteins, they are used as more accurate means of classification, which is called cladistics. Cladistics, this is a more accurate method for classification by analyzing the DNA molecule and the proteins, of course, in order to see whether the organisms are closely related to each other, or they have a common near ancestor or recent ancestor, or they share a very distant ancestor. Now let's go to the classification of Carl Linnaeus, and by the way, it was modified later on, but you don't have to know these modifications except in A, S, and A as Edexcel, not Cambridge. Let me start by the kingdom. The kingdoms, according to Carl Linnaeus, he classified the organisms into 5 kingdoms. So he said that there is an animal kingdom, or he called it kingdom Animalia, but you don't have to write the Latin word. And these are all having nearly the same structures. For example, they are multicellular, all of them. Their bodies are made of more than one cell. All of them are heterotrophs. What's the meaning of heterotrophs? It means that they do not make their own food. They are heterotrophic organisms and they eat other organisms like humans. We are heterotrophic organisms. We eat plants and we eat animals. Again, the other kingdom is the plant kingdom. And all of them, they share nearly the same characteristics. They are all multicellular, and all of them are autotrophs. Means that they feed, or they eat, or they find their food, they make their food by autotrophic nutrition, by photosynthesis, of course, and the organisms, they have a cell wall that is made of cellulose. The third kingdom is kingdom fungi. These were considered as plants at the beginning, but later on they found out that they have certain characteristics specific for only them, and they are not found in plants. Here we can find unicellular fungi, like the yeast, for example, but most of them are multicellular, like mushroom, bread mold, whatever. Fungi, they have a cell wall, but it's not made of cellulose. يعني هنا they have a cellulose cell wall in plants. But in fungi, no. The cell wall is made of another material which is called chitin. Cell wall. Chitin is a polysaccharide or something like a carbohydrate together with a lipid. The cell wall here is not made by cellulose, and the way by which they reproduce is different from that of plants. So they spread by what's known as sporing or spore propagation. Now, what's a spore? A spore is a very minute microscopic seed, something that looks like a seed, and it's very, very small. You can see it under the microscope only. And these spores, they become, they can germinate if there is moisture, if there is darkness, if there is a warm environment, for the new fungi to germinate out of these spores. But what about how they feed? They can feed, or their nutrition can be by saprophytic nutrition.
Or parasitic.
Yes, excellent. Or parasitic. Of course, saprophytic means that they feed on dead organisms or on decayed matter. Parasitic means that they feed on an organism leading to its harm, whether death or disease in an organism or whatever. The next kingdom is kingdom Protoctist. These Protoctists, by the way, he put them in a separate kingdom because he couldn't find any common features between them. Some of them, they look like plants, others look like fungi, others look like animals. So he decided to gather them all together to put them in a different, a separate kingdom. That's why we say that the Protoctists, they have high diversity. And these are single-celled organisms, of course, yani unicellular, and they gather characteristics from all. The last kingdom is kingdom prokaryote, like the bacteria, for example. And these are the only organisms that are, of course, unicellular, but they do not have a nucleus. We say that their nucleus is false. False nucleus. Because we know that the DNA molecule is surrounded by a nuclear envelope. So this is a true nucleus. In prokaryote, the DNA molecule is naked. It is without an envelope. That's why we call these prokaryotes that they have a false nucleus. It's not surrounded by an envelope. Now let's start by this animal kingdom and mention some details about them. Animal kingdom. Animal kingdom is divided into two phyla. The first phylum is vertebrate, gathering all the vertebrates, and the other one is gathering the invertebrates. Of course, every phylum is divided into classes later on, but we are not going to deal with the details of classification here. We are going to learn their description or information about them all together. Invertebrates, they are divided into 5 classes. So let me give you this word, Mr. Fab. So these are mammals. These are reptiles. Yes.
Fish, amphibians, birds.
Very good. Fish, amphibians, and birds. Now here, for the mammals, we find that they have certain characteristics that they share altogether. They share the same characteristics. So what are they? They have this, their skin is covered with hair or fur. So what's the difference between both? No difference, but the fur, it means that there is too much hair, but the hair is less in number, of course. All of them, they have 4 limbs, or as you can, I don't like to call it a leg, it's a limb. They have upper limbs or forelimbs and lower limbs or hind limbs. This means fore, and this is hind. It's written with an E, means from in front or from above. They have, of course, lungs for breathing, and most of them, or nearly all of them, they are living on land or in water. Even if they are living on land, but they can swim in water. But there are some mammals that originally live in water, like the whales, for example, or the dolphins. These are mammals that live in water, and we have also the bat that flies in the air. Now, what's the about reproduction? They all of them give birth, and they suckle their young. It means that their young have to feed on breast milk. There is a certain organism that does not give birth, but it suckles its young, and it is considered among the mammals because it suckles its young. This is the duck-billed platypus. It lays eggs, doesn't give birth, but it suckles its young with breast milk. That's why it was considered among the mammals. Okay. The second class is reptiles. Reptiles here, they have certain characteristics, is that they have scales on their skin, and the scales here differ from those of the fish, that these scales are very hard, they are coarse, and they have sharp edges. Yes, they are very, very hard. Also, the reptiles, they usually have 4 legs or 4 limbs, but these limbs are short and thick. They are weak, by the way. They have lungs to breathe, and of course, they lay eggs. They do not suckle their young, but they're laying eggs only. Do they live on land or in water? Both. Land or water. We have a water reptile like the turtle. We have reptiles like the crocodile or the snakes. They actually live on land, but they can swim in water, but this is not their actual habitat, water habitat. No, they live on land. Next class, amphibians. Amphibians, again, they have certain characteristics where the skin is smooth and moist. Skin. They do not have scales, of course. The amphibians, they respire when they are young by gills, and when they are adults by lungs, of course. Now, where do they live? They live on land, but they jump in water or beside water only to lay eggs. Yes, and their young live in water, of course, tadpoles. Now, what about the number of legs? They have 4 legs. And here, the fertilization is external. Now, what's the meaning of external? Fertilization of eggs. It means
outside the body.
Yes, outside the body. The male and the female, they lay their reproductive cells, and these cells, they fertilize outside the body. Now let's go to the next class, which is fish. The body is covered with scales, but the scales are thinner than those of the reptiles, of course, and we have 2 types of scales, by the way, bony scales and cartilaginous scales.
Which is for shark.
Yes, of course. I was just going to tell you. All the fish, they have bony scales, but the shark has a cartilaginous scales. Well, shark and its family, of course, the hammerfish, whatever. Now, also they fertilize externally, and of course they lay eggs, huge amount of eggs because many of them are lost in the sea or in water, and they breathe by gills. Now let's go, I'd like to mention something here is that reptiles, fish, and amphibians, they are all cold-blooded, or we can call them ectothermic. Now, what does this mean? It means that the temperature of the blood is not constant.
Yes.
Because, yes, the blood changes.
The temperature is the same as the outside temperature.
Yes, of course, it's affected by the external environment, but the mammals and birds, they have the same constant temperature that's not affected by the external environment. Yes, and we call them endothermic. Here are warm-blooded. What about the birds? Their skin is covered, of course, with feathers, and they have 4 limbs as well, where 2 of them were modified into wings. This is a certain adaptation where the limb is modified into another shape in order to suit a certain function that this bird has to perform, of course, which is flying. Now, its bones, they have light bones, because when they fly, they have to be light in weight so that they can fly. If their bones are heavy, they're going to fall down. And they lay eggs, of course, and sit on them. What's breathing? They respire, or they breathe through their lungs. Of course, they live on land or in air. They can fly in the air, and they are endothermic together with the mammals, or we call them warm-blooded, and you just mentioned what does this mean. But let's go now to the other phylum, which is the invertebrates. Invertebrates are classified into several classes as well. Here, the first one is the arthropod. Arthropods, no E, arthropods. They are invertebrates that have jointed legs. Arthro means a joint, and poda means legs. So these invertebrates, they have jointed legs, and these are the only invertebrates that you have to know. The first kind of invertebrate, we have crustacea. This is an R, crustacea. Or we can call them crustacean animals, or crustaceans like shrimps, crabs, prawns, lobsters, whatever. They have certain characteristics. At the beginning, they have an exoskeleton. If you noticed skeleton, that the vertebrates, they have an endoskeleton. The skeleton is found inside their bodies, but here the skeleton is outside the body, and it's formed of a material called chitin as well. We say that they have a chitinous exoskeleton that looks like a waxy material like this. Also, they have one pair of compound eyes. Compound eyes are a kind of eyes that are made of many lenses. Like this. I think I have a picture for the compound eyes, yani, because it was cancelled from the new syllabus. I hope for the housefly. Let me show you this compound eye. You used to know about these in the old syllabus. This is a compound eye. Look at these. These dots, they are just lenses.
Lenses.
Yes. Look here. Many lenses in order to allow this invertebrate to have a wide range of vision. So let me return back. Also compound eyes. Also their body is divided into segments. What's meant by segments, it means that the body is divided into head, thorax, and abdomen. 3 segments, and these segments, the jointed legs are attached with jointed legs. And of course, here in Crustacea, they have more than 4 pairs of jointed legs, and they are provided with antennae in the front of their head. They use these antennae as for their sensitivity. Like the nervous system we have, they have this antennae in order to detect, for example, touch, chemicals, whatever that's found in the in water. Now, the second group of arthropods, we have arachnids, or we call them arachnida. And the example here, like the spiders, scorpions, mites, ticks, all these are arachnids. Now here, the arachnids, their bodies are divided only into 2 segments. As I said before, that there are actually 3 segments, but here 2 segments are fused together. So this segment is called cephalothorax. It means that the head and the thorax are fused together, and this is the abdomen. And arising from these الابdomen here, part of the thorax, we have 4 pairs of jointed legs. You have to know how
all attached the cephalothorax.
Yes. Now here they have also 2 pairs of antennae, not only 1 pair. Antennae. And of course, these antennae, they help them to detect any different changes in their surroundings. Also, they have a certain structure, I'm going to show it to you now, which is called the chelicerae. These chelicerae, 1 pair of chelicerae, they use them to hold their prey, and they have 2 appendages that are called pedipalps for reproduction. And their eyes are simple eyes that look like dots, not like the compound eyes. Let me show you the picture. Here it is. Yes. This is, of course, a spider, and these are they are not very clear. طبعا this is the cephalothorax, this is the head, the thorax fused together, this is the abdomen, and these are the 4 pairs of jointed legs, and here is the chelicerae. They are very, very small, and these are the pedipalps by which they reproduce. طبعا الchelicerae, you don't have to know this information. In the chelicerae there is a poison gland that produces poison in order to attack predators or to kill the prey before eating it. Now let's go to the next arthropod, which is myriapod. By the way, arthropods, we give them Kami, Crustacea, Arachnida, Myriapoda, and Insecta. So the third one, myriapod. This example is the centipede, or we have another example, the millipede. What's the difference between them? The number of legs. And we have Scolopendra. Number of legs only differ, and of course some of them are carnivores and while the rest are herbivores. Now here, if I showed you the picture, Bab, instead of wasting time, this is a centipede and is Scolopendra. The upper one is Scolopendra, and it has less number of legs, as you can see. This is a centipede. Look at the number of legs. Well, millipede, the number of legs is much more than this. If you can see that the whole body is segmented, we cannot count the segments, by the way, because when this organism grows, it adds segments here to this part. If we can divide the body, this is the head. The dividing area, they consider it as the thorax, while the rest is the abdomen. But we cannot decide how many segments, like insects and crustacea and arachnida. We just say that the body is segmented and additional segments are formed in order to increase in size. If you can see here that they have one pair of antennae only, and they have different numbers of legs, jointed legs, according to their species. The head is somewhat fused with the thorax, but the abdomen is clearly segmented, and as you can see that the eye is simple, just looks like a dot. It's not clear here, it's a black dot here. This is the eye, of course, simple eyes. Now the next group, insects. And insects they have a great diversity. Of course, we know examples for segments, and the body is divided, of course, into 3 segments, like this one, the housefly or the mosquito or whatever. Look at this. Here, as you can see, it's very clear that the body is divided into head, thorax, and abdomen. And even these are segmented, but we don't mention the segments here, just say segmented, thorax and abdomen. And they have 3 pairs of jointed legs coming out of the thorax. They have 1 pair of antennae. They have compound eyes. They have 1 or 2 pairs of wings. Now, they say that all the insects, they have 2 pairs of wings, but we can see only 1 pair, but the other pair is rudimentary or vestigial or whatever. It means that it became very small because of some adaptations. In other insects, you can see that the wings, both pairs are very clear, like the dragonfly. Of course, they lay eggs, all of them, where most of them are acting like vectors of diseases or carrying organisms to transmit diseases. Now, this is all, that's all about the animal kingdom. If you have any question about this and you want me to repeat, for example, I can do this now. Or if not, I can jump to, I'll skip to the plants.
Everything is clear, thank you.
Okay, you're welcome. Now let's go to the next kingdom, which is plant kingdom. Kingdom Plantae. Now here we have 2 types of plants. We have flowering plants and non-flowering plants. And flowering. Now why do we have why they divided. And by the way, the plants, we do not say that they have phylum. We say there are divisions, not phylum. Flowering plants, they reproduce by pollens, by or the pollens, the egg cells, they are found in the flower. But the non-flowering plants, they do not produce flowers and they produce spores. So let's take these flowering plants at the beginning, and the example are the ferns or the mosses. They are kinds of flowering, non-flowering plants. And I will put this picture, but let me search for it at the beginning because I have several pictures in front of me. Where are the ferns?
It's right there in the second row to the right.
Oh, to the right. Second row.
Between, next to fish on the left.
Yeah, yes, but I have another one. This is not very clear.
Oh.
I remember I added one, and I always find it after the session. This is not the first time I lose these ferns. Just a second. I'm going to find it. Ferns. No, I couldn't. I will find it after the session. I know that. Let me put this one. Now here, of course, these are leaves. This is one leaf only, and it is called a frond. So the leaf that looks like this, it is called a frond. Now here, if you lifted this frond, you're going to see at the lower surface that there are collections of spores. So the leaves, they act as, or the fronds, they act as the reproductive organs of the plant. Here, these plants, they look like flowering plants in that they have roots, they have stems, and they have leaves. But how are they arranged? If this is the soil, for example, I can see that the leaves, the stem is found horizontal or parallel to the soil, while the roots, they are extending like this. Now, what about the leaves? If I have here one leaf and each leaf is formed of fronds, these are the fronds like this. This is one leaf only that is formed of many fronds like this. And if we lifted the fronds, we are going to see on the lower surface these spores put in collections. Of course, this is the way by which they reproduce by spores. When these spores ripe, so they are going to fall on the soil to produce or to germinate into a new plant. What about the flowering plants? Flowering plants, they have two types, but they share the same characteristics, is that they have, of course, roots, stems, and leaves. And they reproduce sexually by flowers that have fruits that are carried on the stems, of course, and the seeds are produced inside what we know as the ovary of the flower. These flowering plants, there are of two types. According to certain differences, we have the monocots, or actual name is monocotyledonous. Cotyledonous plants, very long word, and we can simply call them the monocots. Even in the exam, you can write the monocots. And we have here the dicotyledonous, or we can call them the dicots. Now, what's the difference between the monocots and the dicots? Now here the monocots, they have only one cotyledon. Now what's a cotyledon? Now if this is a seed, for example, like the maize, you can never separate its parts. It's only one part. But the dicots, if you took the seed of a bean, for example, you can divide or separate its parts into two. That's why we say that this is a dicot, because
it's two.
Yes, it's made of two parts, but this is the monocot. And that's the difference between them, and there are other differences, of course. Here, this is a dicotyledonous or two cotyledons. Now, the other difference is the shape of their leaves. The leaves, they look like this, like maize, with parallel veins. But here, the leaves, no. The leaves, they look like this. If I have a flat plate like this, and there is a network of veins.
Branching veins.
Yes, of course. Thank you. Also, what about the roots? The roots are fibrous. Now, what's the meaning of this? Suppose I have an onion. The onion is monocot, of course. If I have an onion like this, so its roots are in the form of fibers. But here, no, the roots, they are formed of a taproot. If this is the root under the soil, this is called the taproot. And there are branches coming out, secondary roots and root hair and branching root. Yeah. Here, the flowers, we call them trimerous flowers. Now, what's the meaning of tri? It is three. So either I have flowers with 3 petals only, or multiples of 3, or 3 petals, or 6, or 9, or 12. But here the flowers, they are either tetramerous, means in fours, tetra means 4, yani either 4 petals, 8, 12. Here we have also pentamerous.
5.
5s, yes. 5, 10, 15, and so on. Multiples of 5. Yeah. That these are the differences between the monocots and the dicots. Now let's go now to what I have to explain now. Fungi and the prokaryote. I'm going to explain the prokaryote now as a bacteria, as an example. But the fungi and the protoctista they do not have too much explanation in the syllabus, except what I told you about. But let me revise this with you. Where are they? Here are they. Protoctists, as I said, that they are unicellular organisms and they have a great diversity. They were put in one group because they gather information from all other kingdoms. Fungi, these are the only information about them, that they are unicellular or multicellular. The cell wall is made of chitin, and they reproduce by sporing, and this is the way they feed. Only the examples, we have unicellular fungi like yeast and multicellular like mushroom. Or the toadstools, of course, and the difference between them is mushroom can be eaten, by the toadstools are poisonous. We cannot eat them. So let's go now to bacteria with the prokaryotes, but I'm going to differentiate between them and the viruses in the same time. Because, of course, we are revising, and I'm not mentioning although I mentioned all the information to explain it in a short way. Now, what are the viruses and bacteria? Now, both of them, they can be considered as pathogens. Type, what's a pathogen? It's an organism that causes disease. Although bacteria, a lot of them are useful bacteria. A small amount or small kind of bacteria, they are considered as pathogens, but mostly they are beneficial bacteria. Viruses are not considered as cells because they do not have whether a cell membrane, they do not have a cytoplasm, they are only formed of a protein coat together with a genetic material which is either DNA or RNA only. Here, the viruses, I cannot call them living organisms. They are, I can say that they are inactive or active particles. But in the book, they said that they are non-living unless they are found inside the body of a host. Now, what does this mean? It means that the virus outside the living cell, it can form a crystal form or crystallize. But when it finds a living host, it becomes active. It means that here it is inactive. It is just waiting to enter a living cell, and then it activates and starts to use all the cell machinery for its own benefit. About bacteria, they have, of course, a cell wall in their structure. They have cell membrane, which are not found in viruses. They have cytoplasm, but they do not have a nucleus. As I just said, that their nucleus is false nucleus. It has a genetic material in the form of a circular chromosome like this, only one single-stranded DNA without a nuclear envelope. It is found in a certain area called the nucleoid. I'm going to show you a picture now. And this DNA molecule, it carries hundreds of genes, while the DNA or the RNA in the viruses, they carry a few genes, not as much as those carried by bacteria. Of course, bacteria, it does not have organelles except. So what's the meaning of an organelle? An organelle is a microscopic organ. Yani we have, for example, organs like the heart, liver, lungs, all these are organs. But we have microscopic, very small organs that are called organelles, like, for example, mitochondria, like ribosomes. And bacteria, they only have ribosomes that are responsible for, let me continue it here, for protein synthesis. Are they living organisms? Yes, they are. They are not like viruses, non-living except when they enter a host cell. These are living organisms. So let me show you the pictures for viruses and bacteria. Where is it? This is a virus, and where is the bacteria? And here is the bacteria. But unfortunately, Zoom does not allow me except to share one picture. So I'm going to share one. Although one of the students told me that there is another way, and I tried it, but I'm not going to try it again. Maybe I do something wrong. This is a virus, and these are the different shapes of viruses. By the way, the viruses, as you can see, they have geometrical shapes. Viruses, they can, we say that they are specific. It means that the virus that affects humans cannot affect, for example, plants. Every organism has its own virus to attack. Even if I'm telling you something about the viruses of human beings, the virus of the respiratory system does not affect the digestive system. Each system has its own virus to attack. But what about this one that looks like a spaceship? This is a virus that attacks bacteria. It enters inside the bacteria. It's called the bacteriophage. This is the virus. It's formed of an outer protein coat, this yellow one. The green one, it's not found in all, this is called an envelope. It's not found in all viruses. Don't look at these. These are protein receptors. And here is the DNA or RNA molecules, and they are not cytoplasm or any other materials. This is the bacteria. Here it is. As you can see that there is a cell wall. This one, the yellow one, and the green one inside is cell membrane. The outer one is a capsule, and it's not found in all bacteria. This is a cytoplasm. These are the organelles I just told you about. They are called ribosomes. This is the nucleoid or the DNA molecule. So what are these? These are additional DNA molecules that are called plasmids, but they are not found in all bacteria. A type of DNA that allows bacteria to gain some properties for their survival. They are not found in all bacteria. Now, let me go now to the dichotomous key, and I'd like to search for one of them. I have one, but it's not like the one in the book. Yes, here it is. This is the one I need. What is the dichotomous key? The dichotomous key is just a tool that is used by scientists in which the visible features of the organism are found in order to, is a kind of tool that identifies organisms. So here we use questions or statements, and one statement is going to lead to another. For example, if they give you a picture for one or for more than one organisms, and they allow you to choose which one of them and what is the name of these organisms. Now the example I just put for one bird only, and here is the first question. Whether the toes are joined, let me zoom this in, the toes are joined by a flap of skin. Yes, here there is joining, but it's not very clear. Yani if I have here the toes, I have here a flap of skin or something that looks like a web. Whether this has a web or not. If it has a web, so we have to go to number 2. If the toes are separate, so this is a heron. Alas, from the beginning. Now here, this bird, it has webs or it has flaps in between the toes. So I go to number 2. Number 2 says, the beak is as long or longer than the head. If this is in this picture, then go to 3. Yes, of course, it's longer than the head. So we have to go to 3. If it has the same length of the head, so this is a grabby, little grabby. Now I go to number 3. If the top of the head is black, like this one, so this is an avocet. If it's white, then this is a swan. This is called the dichotomous key. It's very easy. It's a gift in the exam. It carries a lot of marks. It's very important to know how to reach the organisms from the pictures to get, of course, a good score in this question. Now I have finished chapter 1, and let us go to chapter 2. It's about organization. of organisms. Now here, organization, it means to know the levels that we have in an organism. So at the beginning, we have to know the cell structure. And let me get the folder, close this folder and get the other one. Just a second. Organization. Now here, all the living organisms, as we know, they are made of cells, whether unicellular or multicellular. So we have something called the typical cell. Typical cell means that it must contain certain structures inside, or covering or whatever, that they share with all other cells. Are there atypical cells? Yes, they are, but you don't have to know about them much. I'm going to explain the typical cells, or what all the cells have in common. A typical cell must have a cell membrane, and of course the cell membrane is a membrane or a covering that is partially permeable, or in other words, that it can allow certain materials to enter the cell or to get out of the cell. All the cells, they must have inside this cell membrane a cytoplasm. So what's the cytoplasm? It's kind of gelatinous fluid in which all the chemical reactions of the cells take place. Or in other words, metabolism. The chemical reactions take place in this cytoplasm. Why? Because the cytoplasm, it contains inside all the organelles that are going to make these chemical reactions. It contains all materials needed. Like, for example, all the chemicals needed for the chemical reactions. And of course, most of the cytoplasm is formed of water. About 72% of the cytoplasm is formed of water, and in this water, the materials dissolve. The cytoplasm is a kind of solution mostly made of water in which all the other materials dissolve, and also it contains all the organelles that will be responsible for metabolism inside the cell. All the typical cells, they have a nucleus. And this nucleus has to be true or false if I'm speaking about the prokaryotes or about bacteria. Nucleus, it contains the DNA, and of course, it is responsible for all what happens inside the cell. It controls everything dealing with the cell. It controls cell division, controls metabolism, it controls everything. Also, all the cells except the prokaryotes, of course, they must have organelles, including mitochondria. But why did I say the mitochondria in particular? Because this is, we call it the powerhouse, or we call it that this is the organism responsible for aerobic respiration in order to produce energy. Also, the typical cell must contain ribosomes, and these are organelles that are very, very minute, the smallest organelles, and they are responsible for protein synthesis. Because at the beginning, I told you that protein is called the vital molecule, or the molecule of life. That's why I have to mention it here as a principle, or a kind of important ribosome organelle that is found in the cell. Now, the cells, they are either plant cells or animal cells. So all animal cells, they have these structures in common. Now, what about plant cells? Our typical plant cells, they have everything in common with the with the animal cells, but there are certain additions or certain things that are found in plant cells and they are not found in the animal cells. We have three.
Cell walls.
Yes, of course, the cell wall. Very good.
Chloroplast.
Excellent. And what's the last one, Ba'a?
The last one is different. No, I'm not sure.
Vacuole.
Yeah.
Yes.
They have a large vacuole.
Yes. Does the animal cell have a vacuole? It has a vacuole.
It has a small vacuole.
Very, very small, very little in number. And here the vacuole is permanent. It's always there. But in animal cells, it is temporary. It just has a function, then it ruptures or bursts in order to form another vacuole and so on. What about the cell wall here? The cell wall is formed of cellulose and it has two or three functions. It gives the plant cell a shape and it gives a plant cell protection. The protection against what? Against bursting. When the plant cell absorbs too much water, the cell wall protects it from bursting by giving the plant cell what we know as turgidity. Turgidity, it means that suppose I have a plant cell like this and it has a certain shape because of the cell wall. An animal cell does not have a definite shape because it does not have a cell wall. If the plant cell absorbs too much water, it's going to look like this, as if it is swollen. This is called turgidity. And it does not rupture in an animal cell because there is no cell wall. If it absorbs too much water, it's going to burst. Also, the vacuole shares in this turgidity in the plant cell. If you are asked about turgidity, we have two things that share in turgidity, the cell wall and the vacuole. Now, what about the chloroplasts? Chloroplasts, we say that they are the organelles of photosynthesis. Why? Because they contain chlorophyll inside. And chlorophyll is the pigment that absorbs or traps the sunlight. That's why chloroplasts, they are responsible for photosynthesis. What about the vacuole? The vacuole, as I just told you, it's always there and it's very big, by the way. In the plant cell, the vacuole, it occupies the majority of the plant cell and pushing all the rest of the components of the cell to the sides. Here inside it, there is a certain solution called the cell sap. That's why we sometimes call it the sap vacuole. So what's the sap? It's a kind of solution that's formed of water and dissolved materials. So what are these materials? Again, these are either useful materials or harmful materials. Both of them are stored inside this vacuole. If useful, they are going to be used up by the plant. If harmful, they have to be excreted or the plant gets rid of them. The plant cell gets rid of them. But all of them, they have to be stored inside the vacuole. And as I just said, that the vacuole also maintains the shape of the cell, gives it turgidity together with the cell wall. If I'd like to show you both types of cells, typical cells, animal and plant cells. I hope I find both of them together. No, I don't have this picture. This is a hand-drawn picture just to show you the animal cell. And later on, I'm going to add the plant cell. is surrounded by a cell membrane, as I just said, and there is cytoplasm inside. This is the nucleus, true nucleus, of course, and all the rest are organelles. Look at the vacuoles here. They are very small and they are temporary. These are the organelles. This is the most important, all organelles are important, but this is more important because this is the mitochondria that give energy. They are responsible for aerobic respiration. These are ribosomes. Of course, this is a collection of ribosomes forming like a sort of cluster. This organelle is found only in animal cells. It is called the centrosome. But I'm not going to mention anything about it now, except when I explain the cell division. Now, and it's not found in the plant cell. This is a plant cell as an example, again hand drawn. Of course, you have to learn how to study by heart the drawings and the labels, because for the exam, they get you a drawing and you have to label it, or you have to point, for example, to the mitochondria, to the nucleus, whatever. This is the cell wall. The very thin line here inside is the cell membrane. The green background is the cytoplasm. This is the vacuole taking most of the cell. This is a nucleus, again ribosomes, chloroplasts, mitochondria, okay, and what else? And while the rest, they are not needed in OL. Type. What do I mean by the levels of organization? I just said that there is something called the levels of organizations. It means that the cells, if they are similar cells added together, and the meaning of similar cells, it means that they have the same shape and they have also the same function. Shape here and structure. Let me add this word because I'm going to give you examples now. If similar cells are gathered together, they will give me a tissue. If different tissues are gathered together, they will give me an organ. But what does this mean? Let me give you an example. The stomach. This is an organ. It is formed of different tissues. The walls is formed of something outside here called connective tissue. Then here we have muscular tissue. And inside here we have epithelial tissue. These are different, and also nervous tissue. These are different tissues. When gathered together, they give me an organ. And the same is true for all other organs. All organs, they are formed of different tissues. Now, if different organs are gathered together, they will give me the organ system. Like what? Like the digestive system, it is formed of different organs, like the respiratory or the gas exchange system, different organs, circulatory system, and so on. All the organ systems, they collect together to give me an organism. But let me explain this part. Are all the cells similar? No. Each cell, it has a certain structure, a certain shape, in order to do a certain function. So what does this mean? Let me give you an example here by the red blood cells. If you looked at the red blood cells, they differ from other cells. Actually, at the beginning of formation of an organism, whether plant, animal, whatever, the cells, they look exactly the same, and they are called stem cells. Later on, when this organism develops, each group of cells are going to form a different system. Each group of cells are going to differentiate. Now, what's the meaning of to differentiate? Means to change its shape and change its structure. Now, why do they have to differentiate? Because each group of cells will be responsible for doing a certain function in the body. And when all the body organs, they work in harmony, this organism will be kept alive. The word to the cell differentiation means that the cells, they change in the shape and structure only for one reason, to make a certain function. The cells of the blood differ from the shape of the cells of the nervous system, for example, because every one of them, every group of cells, they have to do a different function. That's why they have to differentiate.
Is it like specialized cells?
I was just going to
each...
say this. Yes.
Oh.
When the cells differentiate, they will be specialized. And specialized means that they do a special function, special for them. Okay? For differentiation, in order to specialize for doing a certain function. Maybe I'm explaining things in details because I'm used to upper courses أكتر. Maybe you have taken in the cell is specialized only, but I always like to explain correctly. And at the beginning they differentiate, then they are specialized. Like this example, in red blood cells, when they are at the beginning of their formation, they are normal cells with the nucleus, with the cytoplasm, cell membrane, like any other cell. Here, they are undifferentiated. They are still not able to perform their function, but when they differentiate, they will be specialized in carrying the blood gases, because this is their function. They carry oxygen, they carry carbon dioxide. This is their specialty, this is their function. So they have to differentiate at the beginning in order to be specialized for doing this function. But how are they specialized? They are going to lose their nucleus. So at the beginning, they look like this. And when they lose the nucleus, so the part at which the nucleus was found is going to be collapsed, like this. So the nucleus is supposed to be here to give the cell a swollen shape. Now the nucleus disappeared. So that's why the cell collapsed in the middle. And the space where the nucleus was found is going to be filled with hemoglobin. So what is this hemoglobin? It is the pigment that carries oxygen and also carries carbon dioxide. It carries the blood gases. If you looked at this shape from the side, we say that it is a biconcave cell because it has concavity from here and from here. If you looked at it from above or from below, it looks like a disc-like shape. Okay, as if it is compressed from above and below because the nucleus is removed. Now, here I say that these are adaptations. But what's the meaning of an adaptation? It means a certain change that happened. Differentiate aho. يبقى differentiation is a type of adaptation in order to allow these cells to make their function. So, and the function is carrying of blood gases, oxygen or carbon dioxide. يبقى the first adaptation is it became biconcave shape and disc-like. The second adaptation is that it carries hemoglobin. The third adaptation is that it is flexible. But why? It has to be flexible, like not like any other cell, because if I have
It can pass through narrow ways.
very good, very good. The narrowest blood vessel is the capillary. So it can squeeze itself even in order to fit itself in the capillary. طيب, why do we need it to be very, very in close contact with the wall of the capillary? In order to allow the gases, whether oxygen or carbon dioxide, to pass through them easily. The gases must not pass a long distance. No, it is in close contact with the wall of the capillary to allow easy exchange of gases. طبعا later on we are going to take diffusion, and I'm going to re-explain this once more. Here I have a certain adaptations that happened in the red blood cell to allow the red blood cell to perform its function. Now let's go to another type of cell. For example, like the muscle cells. And we have three types of muscles. Here are the types. We have smooth muscles, cardiac muscle, and skeletal muscles. Skeletal muscles because they are attached to the skeleton. Cardiac muscle is specific for the heart only. No other part of the body contains cardiac muscle except the heart. Smooth muscles, they are found in the viscera. We call them the viscera, or the internal organs. Like what? Like the digestive tract, like the blood vessels. They have smooth muscles in the walls, whatever. So what's the function of the muscle cells? And by the way, for the muscles, we do not say cells. For the muscles only, we say muscle fibers, because they look like fibers, like threads, like this, as you can see. What is the function of the muscle fibers? Muscle fibers, they have to contract and relax. For all types of muscles, whether smooth, cardiac, or skeletal, they have to contract and relax in order to get structure closer together, for example. Now here, what's the adaptation bar? Or how are they specialized? How are they differentiated? At the beginning, they have to be longer than any other cell. They have to elongate. That's why we call them fibers. They must contain more proteins. And these proteins are certain types of proteins. We call them contractile proteins. It means that they can contract and relax. Type. What's the meaning of contraction? Contract means that the whole muscle fiber will become shorter, while relaxation means that they become longer. Are they going to be very, very long whenever they relax? No. Suppose I have a muscle fiber. This is its original length. I'm giving you an example.
Its optimum length.
Excuse me?
It becomes longer to its optimum length.
Yes, to its original length. Yes, it becomes shorter like this to contract, and then it returns back to its original length. Because some of the students, they think that the muscles, whenever they relax, they become longer and longer and longer. This means that we are going to be very tall, or very long. It returns back to its original length, yes, as you said. But this is the kind of adaptation, or change. Now, let me give you another example for these cells. Uh, here are they. Come on, this is a very silly drawing. I don't have except this now. These are called ciliated cells. It means that the cells will have cilia. Here are the cilia. What are the cilia? Unfortunately, I heard some teachers say that they are hair on the cells. This is not hair. This is a cytoplasmic extension. Now, what does this mean? We know that the cell contains cytoplasm. Sometimes in some cells, there is an extension like this that is filled with cytoplasm, and these extensions are called cilia. So why are they found? What's their function? They have to move in order to push mucus. Now, what's mucus? This is a kind of protein. It's called glycoprotein, and it is produced from certain cells. Let me draw the cell. This cell is found here, and it is called the goblet cell. This is its nucleus. It's called the goblet cell. Again, this is another kind of differentiated cells. And these goblet cells, they produce mucus, and this mucus appears at the surface. Like, for example, in the trachea. The trachea, it has goblet cells and cilia. Why? Because when we breathe in, or when we inspire, when we inhale, the nose, it contains hairs in order to, these are hairs in the nose, to trap dust, bacteria, whatever. These dust and bacteria may escape the nose, so they go through the trachea to be captured or trapped by this mucus. This mucus contains dust stuck on it and bacteria, yes, and this is very dangerous to stay in the body. So these cilia, they just move to and fro like this. We call it a wafting movement in order to sweep
the mucus upward.
Yes, sweeps the mucus up so it can be swallowed if it reached the throat. Taban, this is so long. The mucus is thin and less sticky. Normally, we do not feel the mucus when it's moving or even when it reaches the throat. But if we have common cold or influenza or anything dealing infection with the lung, this mucus becomes very sticky that the cilia cannot push it. So we have to cough in order to expel it out of the body. This is another adaptation. All adaptations are found in the animal cells. No, there are for plant cells as well. Let me show you this structure as an example, of course, for plant cells. This is the root hair cell. A cell like this. If I have here the root, for example, a transverse section, its cells are root hairs, are cells, and some of them are root hair cells. We have epidermal cells, and some of them are modified or adapted to form the root hair cells. And this is the root hair cell. It's a normal cell containing everything of the plant cell, but it has a cytoplasmic extension. It is not a hair. It is, again, a cytoplasmic extension. And as you can see that the vacuole entered through it. This shape was taken, adaptation was formed in order to allow the root hair to perform a certain function. Now, what's the function here? Absorption. To absorb water and minerals from the soil. Can the other root cells absorb? Yes, they can. But this is better because it gives me more surface area to allow the materials not only to be absorbed through a small area. No, it's going to be absorbed all through this surface area of the root hair. Here in the root hair cells, they are elongated, part of it is elongated in order to provide more surface area. And by the way, there are a lot of them in order to allow more and more surface area for absorption. Now, I have again another adaptation for the plants. We have the xylem. Here it is. Come on, this picture is not that good, Yani. I will explain it. Xylem vessels. These are the vessels or the channels through which water and minerals are going to pass from the roots upward to the leaves in order to perform photosynthesis. At the beginning, at the beginning of formation of the plant is so young, so it is formed of cells. Suppose these are the cells, they are arranged one above the other like this. Up till now, it is not a specialized, they are not specialized cells. To be specialized, they have to differentiate or to show certain adaptations. But what are the adaptations? Here, all the cross walls between the cells are going to be removed, and from above and below as well. Taban, all the picture is going to be erased. Again, another disadvantage of Zoom. The end is going to look like this. This is a xylem. Everything is lost from inside in order to allow the cells that I just showed you to have a patent pathway without any interruptions to reach the xylem of the leaf. So if this is the stem, and by the way, it is connected with the xylem of the root. All of them, they have xylem vessels, and a lot of them is found. Type. Because everything is removed from the cell, so the cells, this means that the xylem is going to be very weak. To support the xylem and to allow it to be stronger. Yes, there are depositions of lignin, and this lignin is a strong, hard material. And when the plant cells, they allow, or the lignin is deposited, we say that the plant cells became mature. Alas, they can perform their function. Another adaptation for the plant cell is the presence of the palisade cells. Now here is a section of the leaf, and we have these cells. They are called the epidermal cells. Look at these cells. These cells, they are called the mesophyll cells. And these cells, they differ from these ones, from the ones below. These ones are called the palisade mesophyll. And the adaptation here is that they are full of chloroplasts. Why? Because the sun is here. So they are adapted to have, or changed, or differentiate, to have a lot of chloroplasts to trap as much sunlight as possible. But about this layer, yes, they share photosynthesis as well, but they have less amount of chloroplast, yes, and they have also a lot of air spaces in between. This is another adaptation in order to gather as much carbon dioxide as possible and as much oxygen as possible after photosynthesis is performed. Unfortunately, our time ran out and I didn't finish what I expected to finish. Right now, I finished only for chapter 2. There is a very, very small part that I didn't mention اللي هو the size of the specimen. I'm going next time inshallah. We have another session. I forgot when. I can look at my schedule
Saturday, I
yet.
think, Sunday.
Okay, next time I'm going to continue where I hope I do more than this. And we are going to solve classified questions about the chapters that we finished. Okay, so
Right.
see you inshallah next time, and bye bye. Have a nice weekend. Bye bye.
You too.
Thank you.